She buried it. She buried her. She buried the truth. But the scarf tied around the package on her porch wasn't a coincidence. It was the same one she had laid gently in her sister's coffin, the one she had whispered into before the dirt covered her face. Now it was knotted tight around a box, and inside was an object so intimately familiar it stopped her breath. Alongside it a message. You don't know what happened that night. Her sister's death was supposed to be sealed in the past. Someone was tearing it open. One grave gift at a time. Mara woke before the light reached the window, heart racing from a dream she could not remember. She padded barefoot into the kitchen, the tiles cold as old stone. The house was still except for the soft ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the wind dragged brittle leaves along the porch boards, a hollow scrape. That sounded like someone whispering her name. She opened the door to breathe the morning air and froze. A small box sat on the top step, wrapped tightly in a scarf so familiar it knocked the breath from her chest. Crimson, frayed at the edges, stiff from the cold. The scarf she had buried with her sister 6 years ago, folded carefully across Lila's chest before the coffin closed out. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. The fabric was damp, heavy, carrying the scent of soil. She had folded this scarf herself. She remembered smoothing it flat, whispering a private goodbye no one else would hear. But here it was. She carried the box inside, setting it on the table, like it might shatter. For a long moment she simply stared at it. Then she tugged the scarf loose and laid it across her lap, the cold clinging to her fingers. The box beneath was small and plain, sealed with a single strip of tape. When she opened it, something metallic clattered against the wood. Lila's wedding ring, split clean down the center. Beside it, a folded note. Mara's stomach tightened as she unfolded the paper and read the words written in jagged ink. You don't know what happened that night. She read it again and again, each time hoping the letters would rearrange into something else. But the message was clear. Her gaze drifted to the locket on the windowsill, the one she had taken from Lila's jewelry box after the funeral. Inside was a photo of the two of them as children, arms around each other, hair tangled from the same wand. She touched it now, almost absently, as the weight of the ring in her palm grew unbearable. Someone knew. The sound of the wind outside deepened, but this time it felt closer, like footsteps along the porch boards. Mara spun to the window, heart hammering, only to see the empty yard. She closed the curtains, pressing the scarf to her face. The smell of earth and rain soaked into her skin, a ghost of the night she had tried so hard to forget. She thought of Caleb, Lila's husband. The way he had stood at the graveside, jaw tight, not a single tear falling. He had always claimed it was an accident, Lila slipping on the cliffs after a fight, but there had been whispers even then. Mara remembered the bruises Lila had once brushed off, the way her laughter had sounded hollow at the last family dinner. Caleb's name came first, sharp in her mind, but another name followed, one she hadn't thought of in years. A name Lila had been afraid to say out loud. Mara slid the ring and note back into the box, wrapping the scarf around it again with trembling hands. She tucked it under the sink, behind a row of chipped china cups. She would ask the mailman if he had seen anything. She would call Caleb. She would do something, anything. Because someone had dug up a past that should have stayed buried. As she stood at the bathroom mirror later, brushing her hair, the reflection caught on a thin crack running across the glass, splitting her face in two. For a moment, it felt like the mirror was telling the truth she could not say. One part of her believed Caleb was guilty. The other part feared she was wrong. One name stayed. One name vanished. But neither belonged to who she thought. Mara parked just outside the gates of the cemetery, unwilling to drive over the crunching gravel that always seemed to echo like an intrusion. The winter air bit at her lungs as she stepped out, scarf pulled close, boots sinking into the brittle grass. The silence was thicker here, the kind that wrapped itself around you until you felt like you were the trespasser. Even among your own dead, she walked the narrow path, counting each stone, though she already knew where to go. The locket around her neck felt heavier with every step. She hadn't opened it in months, not since the first time she'd admitted only to herself that the photo of her and Leela smiling inside was a lie. Her sister's grave looked the same at first glance. The stones still straight, names still etched deep, flowers long withered, but resting where she'd left them last. Mara knelt, tracing Leela's name with her glove, and felt the familiar sting of memory. The phone call in the middle of the night, Caleb's voice clipped and hollow, saying Leela had fallen from the cliffs, but then she noticed the soil dot. It wasn't settled. It bore a slight rise, like something had shifted beneath it, and a patch near the edge looked darker, fresher. Her breath misted against the cold as she pressed a hand to the ground, fingertips grazing the softened earth. She saw it then, a footprint, faint but unmistakable, leading away from the grave and disappearing into the grass. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. She looked up, scanning the grounds, but saw no one. Only the caretaker's shed in the distance, its door hanging open slightly. Mara rose and walked toward it, legs unsteady, every instinct telling her to turn back. The caretaker, a man in his 60s with sunken eyes and a limp, stepped out just as she reached the shed. "You again," he said softly, pulling his coat tighter. "Graves don't like to be fussed over too much. Best to leave them be. Has anyone been here?" Mara asked, her voice thinner than she intended. She gestured toward Leela's grave. "The ground, it's disturbed. Someone's been there." He frowned, glancing past her, but shook his head. "No one but me, and I don't touch what's not mine." He hesitated, gaze softening for a fraction of a second. "I remember your sister. Pretty girl, kind even when she was sad." It hurt. And me to see how small she'd gotten near the end. The words hit harder than they should have. Layla had always been the bright one, the one who drew people in. Mara wanted to ask if he'd seen the bruises, heard the arguments she'd heard through the walls, but she didn't. She turned back toward the grave instead, clutching her coat as if it could hold her together, but the photo hid something worse. She thought of Caleb again, of his sharp temper, the way he'd kept his distance at the funeral, as though grief were a performance he couldn't stomach. But she also remembered the night he'd shown up at her door, weeks after Lila's death, eyes bloodshot, asking if she ever thought it could have been different. She hadn't answered then. She didn't know how to now. By the time Mara returned home, the winter light had already dimmed. She locked the door, pulled the curtains, and tried to shake the chill clinging to her skin. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't recognize the number. She opened the message and felt the ground tilt beneath her. Wait for the next gift. She dropped the phone and pressed her palms to the counter, struggling to steady her breath. The scarf from the first box still hung over the back of a chair, its edges stained with dirt. Mara stared at it, the silence of the cemetery still echoing in her ears. If this was a game, someone had just taken the next move. Mara hadn't stepped inside the house in years. The air was the same, stale with dust and lavender sachets, long dried out. Every creak of the floorboards sounded louder than it should, as though the house was aware she had no right to be there. Her mother hovered at the edge of the kitchen, wringing a dish towel, her eyes flicking toward the door as though willing Mara to leave. "I won't be long," Mara said softly, though she wasn't sure who she was reassuring. She climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, every step carrying a ghost of Lila. She remembered the two of them sitting at the top of the staircase as girls, whispering secrets, listening to their mother and father argue behind closed doors. The attic smelled the same now, cedar, paper, and something faintly sweet like old perfume. The desk stood against the far wall, sunlight from the small circular window cutting across it. Mara ran her fingers over the wood, tracing scratches that matched the memory of Leela's rings digging into it as she wept at 16, shoulders shaking, whispering about a boy she couldn't stop seeing even though he hurt her. Caleb. The bottom drawer wouldn't budge. A small rusted keyhole winked at her like an eye that had been shut too long. She tugged harder, then crouched low to peer inside the thin gap. Shadows of paper, maybe envelopes, just out of reach. But the photo hid something worse. She reached for a letter opener in the drawer. Above, when she heard the floor creak behind her, Mara spun, heart in her throat. Caleb stood at the top of the attic stairs, one hand braced on the frame, the other jammed into his jacket pocket. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. The words carried no anger, but there was something sharp in them, something unspoken. His eyes darted to the locked drawer, then back to her. "I was just—" Mara trailed off. She hated how small her voice sounded. He stepped forward, the boards groaning under his boots. "Whatever you're looking for. Don't. You think digging it up will make it easier? It won't. Leave the past alone, Mara, for your own good." She wanted to scream at him, to ask if he had buried her sister deeper than the coffin allowed. Instead, she watched as the muscles in his jaw shifted, the faint sheen of exhaustion clouding his eyes. He looked like a man carrying a weight no one else could see, but the ache in her chest only hardened. "I can't," she whispered. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. The sound of his boots on the stairs faded into silence that pressed heavy against the walls. Mara didn't move until she heard the front door close. She wanted to break the drawer open, but her hands shook too badly. She descended the stairs and left the house before her mother could stop her. That night, she sat alone in her kitchen, the locked drawer burning in her mind. The scarf from the first box still lay draped over the chair, its edges stained with soil that no amount of scrubbing could remove. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house until her phone buzzed on the table. A package rested on the porch. She brought it inside with numb fingers. Inside was a photograph, edges curled, corners wet with dried blood. It showed Leela wrapped in the same scarf Mara had buried her in, standing close to Caleb, her smile soft and unsure. The date in the corner was 3 days before she died. Mara stared at the photograph, her hands trembling so violently she nearly tore it. The crack in the kitchen window split her reflection in two as she lifted her gaze, unable to breathe. She wasn't alone the night she died, and Caleb knew it. The wind carried the same scent it had 6 years ago: salt, wet stone, and something sharp that clung to the back of Mara's throat. She gripped the photograph in one hand, knuckles pale, as Caleb stood across from her in the driveway. He had aged like stone left out in the weather, harder at the edges, cracks barely visible until you looked close. "It's fake," he said, voice steady but too rehearsed. His gaze flicked to the image of Leela in the scarf, standing close to him, 3 days before she died. "You think I'd keep something like that? Who would even—" "You knew where the scarf was buried," Mara cut in, her voice like glass. Caleb froze. His jaw tensed, breath stalling just enough for her to see the truth flash through him. He tried to mask it with anger, but it was too late. "You need to let this go," he said quietly, stepping closer. His eyes were bloodshot, not from drink, but from nights without sleep. "You don't understand what was happening back then." "Then tell me," Mara said. She hated how much she still wanted to believe him. He looked at her as if weighing something he could never say. "Leela wasn't the saint you remember," he whispered. "She had secrets. And she was scared, Mara. But it wasn't me she feared most. But the photo hid something worse." Mara turned away, unable to trust the heat in her chest, whether it was grief or rage. Caleb's voice followed her, softer now, a warning wrapped in regret. "If you keep digging, you'll end up just like her." The cliffs rose in her mind, jagged and wet. She saw Leela again, barefoot on the edge, the ocean swallowing her voice as she argued with Caleb. That was the story Mara had built. The one she told herself at night. Caleb's jealousy, his debts, his hands pushing too hard. But another image broke through the way Lila's face had looked that last time they spoke. A phone call cut short, her voice trembling when she said, "It's not safe anymore." Mara left without another word, shoving the photograph into her coat pocket. The locket at her throat pressed cold against her skin, the image of her and Lila inside smiling like they had never been touched by fear. Rain began to fall as she drove home, the wipers struggling against the downpour. She tried to focus on the road, but the questions churned too loud. Who had sent the photo? Why now? Who had dug up the scarf? She didn't see the SUV at first. It appeared in the rearview mirror, headlights cutting through the rain like knives. She pressed her foot to the gas, but the vehicle closed the distance easily. Her breath came shallow as it pulled up alongside her, metal black and gleaming, even in the storm. Then it swerved. The impact jolted through her body as her car lurched sideways, tires screeching on wet asphalt. She gripped the wheel, fighting to regain control, but the SUV rammed her again, harder this time. She saw only blinding light and the ghost of her sister's face in the mirror. As the guardrail loomed, Mara screamed, wrenching the wheel at the last second. Her car spun, skidding to a stop just shy of the edge. The SUV slowed in the distance, taillights glowing like watching eyes. Before disappearing into the rain. She sat trembling, forehead pressed to the wheel, rain hammering the roof like fists. The scarf, the grave, the photograph, all of it blurred into one truth. The past wasn't the only thing trying to kill her. The antiseptic smell clung to her skin, even though she hadn't moved in hours. Mara blinked at the ceiling of the hospital room, the dull throb in her ribs reminding her she was still alive. She didn't remember much about the crash, only the headlights swallowing her in the rain, the scream trapped in her throat, and the silence afterward. A soft knock startled her. Evie stood in the doorway, small and bird-like, clutching a piece of paper so tightly it looked like it might tear. Lila's eyes stared back at Mara through that child's face, wide, hesitant, already old enough to understand things adults hoped children would forget. "Hi, Aunt Mara," Evie whispered. Mara motioned her closer, forcing a smile that hurt. "Hi, baby." Evie climbed onto the chair by the bed, knees drawn up to her chest. She didn't speak at first. Then, almost shyly, she slipped the folded paper onto Mara's blanket. I drew this," she said. Mara unfolded it carefully. A crude sketch of cliffs under a dark sky, a scarf drawn in red crayon, and a shadowy figure standing behind a smaller figure that looked like Lila, arms outstretched as if trying not to fall. Mara's throat tightened. "It wasn't Uncle Caleb," Evie said suddenly, as if confessing a secret. Her small hands gripped the blanket. Mommy wasn't scared of him. She was scared of someone else. But the drawing hid something worse. Mara wanted to ask who, but the child's face shut down like a door closing. Evie just shook her head and whispered, "I heard her on the phone the night before. She said they were coming. And that she didn't want me to see." Mara reached out and held her niece's hand, feeling how fragile it was, the faint tremor of fear still there after all these years. "You did the right thing showing me," Mara said softly. Evie's gaze drifted to the locket at Mara's neck. "Mommy used to wear that every day," she whispered. "I know," Mara said. Her voice was barely audible. When Evie left, Mara was alone again, the hospital room suddenly too large and too empty. She stared at the drawing, tracing the red scarf with her finger. Caleb's name burned less certain now. The question spiraled tighter. Who else? Who had sent the scarf, the photo? And why did it feel like someone out there wasn't trying to hurt her, but protect her? The nurse discharged her by evening. Mara returned home to the echoing quiet of her kitchen. The scarf still hung on the chair, a reminder of the grave, the photo, and now Evie's words. Her phone buzzed once, a single notification. She froze. When she saw the small padded envelope sitting on the doorstep, inside was a USB drive. No note this time. Mara's hands trembled as she plugged it into her laptop. The speakers crackled, then a voice filled the room. It was Lila. "If you're hearing this," her sister whispered, breath uneven, "they're going to kill me." Mara's entire body went cold. She pressed a hand to her mouth, unable to move as the recording played on. Her sister's fear crawling through every syllable. Layla had known she was going to die. Mara replayed the recording until the words blurred into static. Layla's voice trembled with a fear that felt alive even now. "If you're hearing this," she whispered again and again, "they're going to kill me." Mara clutched the locket at her throat as if it could anchor her. It didn't. She scrolled back to the beginning, forcing herself to listen carefully this time. Between shallow breaths, Lila's words painted names, debts, promises unpaid. "Pierce," she said at last. Harlan Pierce, the man who had all but owned their father before the business collapsed. Mara hadn't heard his name in years, but it made sense in a way that hollowed her out. Caleb had been cruel, maybe desperate, but Pierce could crush people without lifting a hand. But the recording hid something worse. She knew the locked drawer at her mother's house might hold the proof. So she waited until night and crept through the side door she still knew by heart. Her mother's room was dark, her breathing shallow from sleep as Mara climbed to the attic. The keyhole glinted when her flashlight beam caught it. She used a flathead screwdriver from the toolbox and forced it until the wood splintered, a crack as loud as thunder in the still house. The drawer slid open at last, revealing yellowed envelopes tied with frayed ribbon. She didn't breathe as she untied them. Letters, contracts, all signed by Pierce. Threats dressed up as offers: pay what's owed or lose more than the business. And a bank slip dated the week after Layla's funeral, a transfer for $75,000 marked hush fee. Mara sat on the floor, knees drawn up, the letters trembling in her hands. This was bigger than Caleb, bigger than jealousy or fear. Pierce had taken everything from her family once, and Lila had known it would happen again. She tucked the letters and the USB recording into her coat pocket, already knowing the police wouldn't help. People like Pierce didn't leave fingerprints. But this was enough. If she went public, someone would have to listen. She left the house with her heart thundering. The night was heavy with fog as she reached her car, fumbling for the keys. A van rolled slowly down the street. Its lights dimmed, deliberate, as it pulled up behind her. Mara froze. 2 men stepped out. Their faces were blank shadows in the mist. She backed away, but one of them grabbed her from behind, his gloved hand clamping over her mouth. The other pulled the letters from her pocket, glancing through them with a calmness that felt practiced. "She knows," one said simply. They shoved her into the back of the van. Her wrists were bound with cable ties, her mouth gagged. She thrashed once, then stilled as the doors slammed shut. Darkness swallowed her, the faint hum of the engine the only sound. The scarf from the first package flashed through her mind, the soil still clinging to it, the footprint at the grave. All of it led here. If she couldn't get out alive, the truth would die with her. The ropes burned her wrists each time she shifted. Mara sat in a rusting metal chair bolted to the floor, the air thick with oil and mildew. The warehouse was silent except for the distant hum of water dripping through a pipe. She could see her breath in the cold. Harlan Pierce stepped out of the shadows with the calm precision of a man who had always been obeyed. His suit was immaculate, his cuff links flashing when he adjusted his tie. "You should have left it buried," he said, voice low, almost paternal. "Your sister thought she could outlive her mistakes. You're smarter than she was." Mara's jaw tightened. "You killed her." He tilted his head, amused. "I didn't need to. She was going to ruin herself anyway. She couldn't pay what your father owed, and she thought airing my sins would fix hers." Caleb understood the stakes. He cleaned up for her. But the words hid something worse. Pierce stepped closer, crouching so his eyes were level with hers. There was no anger there, only the faintest flicker of something like regret. "You're so sure he's the monster." But grief rewrites memory, Mara. Caleb was complicated. He wanted to protect her, even when he knew it was useless. The door groaned open behind Pierce, and Mara's breath caught. Caleb stepped inside. He looked older than she remembered from their last confrontation, his face hollowed by sleepless nights. He held a gun in one hand, arm rigid at his side. "About time," Pierce said without looking back. "End this." Caleb's gaze met Mara's, and for a brief second the world went still. He reached into his jacket pocket with his free hand and pulled out a small envelope. He stepped past Pierce and pressed it into Mara's bound hands. "It's from Lila," he whispered. Pierce turned sharply. "What are you doing?" Caleb's answer was only movement. He raised the gun, not at Mara, but at Pierce. The shot rang out too late. Pierce's men were faster. Caleb's body jerked violently as the bullets tore through him, the gun clattering from his grasp. He fell to his knees and then forward, collapsing at Mara's feet. The envelope slid from her trembling fingers to the floor, its corner stained with his blood. Pierce didn't look away from her as the men reloaded. "Now you see where this leads," he said softly, as if consoling her. Mara bent her head, not to surrender, but to shield the letter. She could feel it through the rope, stiff with the weight of secrets. She had no idea what it contained, but she knew it was the last thing Lila had left behind. She slipped it into the waistband of her jeans when Pierce turned away, tucking it close to her skin. The door opened again, this time flooding the warehouse with cold night air as Pierce's men prepared to move her. Mara looked at Caleb's still body one last time, her throat raw with everything she couldn't say. Mara had the proof, but Pierce would kill again to stop her. The first thing she heard was birdsong. Not courtroom gavel cracks or camera flashes. Just birds somewhere beyond the cracked window of her motel room. Morning had bled into the sky like bruised silk, pale and worn. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, still in yesterday's clothes, her hands trembling around a porcelain mug gone cold. She hadn't slept. The USB lay beside the TV remote. The scarf, Lila's scarf, was folded on the dresser, the same one from the photo, now free of blood, washed, pressed. But its weight remained. Fabric can carry ghosts if stitched with enough silence. Pierce's name was already climbing headlines. A media storm unraveling decades of secrets in minutes. There were no more gifts, no more messages. Just evidence, concrete, damning, public. The voice recording, the letters, the final note signed in Lila's curling hand. The morning she released them, she half expected a bullet through the window. Instead, she got a knock. A social worker. Evie stood behind her, clutching a drawing of a tree that looked like the cliff's dot in the courthouse. Pierce didn't plead. He didn't speak. His jaw twitched when the judge read out the charges: fraud, obstruction, conspiracy, accessory to murder. But his eyes flicked to Mara in the gallery, not hatred, not fear, just the emptiness of a man who had buried too many sins to remember which one poisoned him. He would rot in silence. But silence was no longer enough. Later that week, Mara walked the cemetery path alone, her boots crunching the brittle grass, air thick with rain that hadn't yet come. She passed the caretaker, who nodded and looked away. Lila's grave sat at the far end, beneath the oldest tree. A pink ribbon still fluttered from the branch above. Evie's doing, likely, a child's way of marking presence. Proof that memory lived even when truth slept. Mara knelt, the scarf in her hands. She hadn't cried. Not since the night she listened to Lila's voice say, "If you're hearing this, they're going to kill me." Grief felt different now. It wasn't a storm, it was sediment, layers of weight pressing inward. She brushed dust from the headstone with her sleeve, then laid the scarf across it, carefully, like tucking someone in. But the photo hid something. Worse, it wasn't just the killer's face. It was Leela's eyes pleading, resigned, already knowing. In the wind, the scarf lifted slightly, flapped once, then settled. The same motion Lila used to make when she closed her journal, firm, final, soft with regret. Mara sat back, knees soaked from the grass. The cemetery was quiet, but her heartbeat wasn't. Every beat said, "Tell it, speak it, let it burn. If justice still matters, you'll want the next page." Evia's voice echoed in her head. Mommy was scared of someone else. That someone was now behind bars. But Mara knew the shadows didn't vanish with one arrest. Harlan Pierce had partners. Money leaves fingerprints only if you want to see them. She pulled a small locket from her pocket. Its hinge rusted, inside a photo of two little girls with muddy shoes and scraped knees. Lila and her. Summer 1993. She set it by the headstone, beside the scarf. Then stood. A storm was rolling in behind her. The dead don't rest until the living set them free. The stadium smelled of cut grass and warm asphalt, the kind that clung to skin and memory alike. Mara sat on the bleachers near the aisle, her hands folded tight in her lap, watching rows of black gowns ripple like waves. Evia was easy to spot in the crowd, her chin lifted, a tassel brushing her cheek with each breeze. The scarf was tied diagonally over her shoulders like a sash, crimson against the uniform black. Soft as the day it was first folded across a coffin, Mara exhaled slowly, as if afraid to break the moment. 10 years ago, she couldn't have imagined this day. Back then, grief had been an anchor, pulling her under until she couldn't tell air from water. But Evia's voice, the small voice that had whispered about a shadow behind her mother, had kept Mara climbing toward the surface. It had reminded her there was something worth saving. Applause erupted as the graduates crossed the stage one by one, names echoing through the microphone like prayers. Evia reached for her diploma with steady hands, smiling at the principal, her cheeks flushed from the heat. Mara's heart clenched at the sight of it, how much she looked like Leela when she smiled, but the photograph hid something worse. Mara had once believed survival was enough, that unearthing the truth was the final act. Yet even with Pierce gone, even with the evidence public, ghosts had lingered. Healing wasn't forgetting. It was remembering without fear. When Evia stepped off the stage, she spotted Mara in the crowd. Her smile widened, and for a moment, Mara saw all the years between them, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees, the whispered confessions of a girl who had grown up with shadows around her edges. Evia pushed through the crowd, her diploma clutched in one hand, and Mara rose to meet her. "You wore it," Mara said, touching the scarf gently. Evia nodded. "It's hers," she whispered. "But it's mine now too." The words caught in Mara's throat. She reached for Evia, pulling her into an embrace. The scarf brushed against her face, carrying no scent of soil, no echo of the grave. Only warmth dot around them. Families clapped and shouted, camera flashes sparking like tiny stars. Mara held on, feeling the weight that had defined her for a decade shift, finally, into something lighter. The curse was broken. The girl was free. She leaned close to Evia's ear, her voice a whisper meant only for her. "She's free now," Mara said, and for the first time Mara believed it.